Muy buenas tardes, señores y señoras.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Dr. Mara Gomez, and I invite you to continue with the works of this plenary session of the Global Network on Electoral Justice. We are going to start with the second session called Political Financing of Elections, and we have with us today Mr. Enrique Andrade González, who is a counselor of the National Electoral Institute in Mexico. Luz de Los Ángeles, Retana Chinchilla, alternate justice of the Supreme Tribunal of Elections of Costa Rica. Marvin Situala Mwana Mwamba, Deputy Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Zambia. And to chair this session, we have Felipe Fuentes Barrera, Justice of the High Chamber of the Electoral Tribunal in Mexico. We kindly request that your questions are not above 3 minutes, and I am going to give now the floor to the president of the session, Justice Felipe Fuentes Barrera. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you. It is to me a great honor to be here today with you within the works organized by the Global Network on Electoral Justice, because as we said this morning, these are proposals that we are expecting from these tables, sharing proposals and tools in order to know the experiences of different countries in order to start the best practices for the resolution of electoral disputes. I would like to congratulate the organizers for this project, specifically to Ms. Janino Talora and Deputy José Luis Vargas Valdez, who have driven this network, to which I congratulate for your service, interest, and the interest also to build an international dialogue, which is going to be the foundation in order to reach the goals of the international democracy. Daniel Sobato, in his work Money and Political and Electoral Elections, refers that in September 2012, the Global Commission on Elections, Democracy, Insecurity, which was headed by Mr. Kofi Annan, the then Secretary of the United Nations, published a report where they identified a notorious increase of a political, non-controlled, non-revealed, illegal financing in the whole world as one of the main threats for electoral integrity in the contemporary democracies. This report supports that as of the Global Declaration of Human Rights, there are fundamental principles and defined standards that should drive to elections with integrity. Nevertheless, such integrity is threatened by several factors, such as institutional weakness in several countries, in order to shield the electoral processes from the intromission of the organized crime financing. This situation could decrease the democracies, their strength to promote political equality, empowerment of those that have the least, and the ability to manage social conflicts in a pacific manner. In the report, the conclusions are that all the democracies, it doesn't matter if they are important economies, consolidated, or if they are in development, there is a common characteristic, which is the challenge to design financing plans for the electoral politics. Norberto Bobbia affirmed that the power and money are two sides of the same money, and that's true. Politics are financed with money, and it has to be legal, regulated, and overseen in order to avoid some issues to inside in the decision-making process. All the institutions must be strong enough in order to content the intentions to go back in time. The system is complex, reinforced, and all this has been built in order to provide with certainty and surety the electoral process that, as a result, drives to have a government, representation, and legitimacy. The discussion in Mexico on the way of how to finance policy has not finished. As of the earthquake that we have suffered in Mexico, we heard different opinions regarding privatizing politics as well as to decrease the resources that were granted to the political parties. Nevertheless, I think that the source of this economy creates better guarantees for the stakeholders of the democratic game. The task is very complex because nowadays, in a globalized world with advanced technologies and when communication ways that are instantaneous, these are things that are not in our favor. So the key is to find the equivalent, the equitative formula. Mexico's oversight goes on 4 axes. It is national because the Electoral Administrative Authority is reporting about all the political parties in the country. It is expedite because it's done simultaneously to the development of the electoral process. It is modern because it uses state-of-the-art technologies which allow in real time to know the usage, origin, source of the public resources, which is the foundation for transparency. And this is an essential element for integrity and consolidation of democratic quality in our political systems. As a constitutional tribunal in electoral matters, we have to set foundations to set this process abiding by the Constitution so that money is not determining for the result of the elections, but debate and plurality of ideas as well as the best proposals, those who won, and the quality of democracy. In Mexico, as you all know, there are 2 authorities which share this oversight task, the Electoral Tribunal, which is an instrument, and the judiciary policy through the rulings with the Electoral Administrative Authority. And finally, I should highlight that all the juridical referendums are good to build on certainty and juridical safety. Thank you very much. And with this presentation, we will begin listening our speakers as the organizers have set out. So I am going to give the floor to Mr. Enrique Andrade González, which is a counselor of the Electoral National Institute. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I would like to thank the invitation to the Electoral Tribunal of the Federal Judiciary, to Justice Mr. Vargas and Madame Janino Talora, to share with you some thoughts about oversight and the experience that we have in Mexico about this topic in the Electoral National Institute. And as Mr. Felipe Fuentes was mentioning to you, in this relation that we have called a dialogue between the National Electoral Institute and the Electoral Tribunal of the Federal Judiciary. So we have some claim resolution systems where we participate between the INE and the tribunal, so that's why I'm very happy to be here with you. And it's very good also. I'm very proud to be part of this global network on electoral justice. In Mexico, we have a huge history of transition to democracy. As you know, we lived in a party that was in administration for a long time, undoubtedly until 1977 with the first electoral reform, which trended to incorporate other political forces to the democratic system. This has progressed, and in 1990 there is an electoral reform, an important electoral reform, where we set out that there has to be a public funding for all the political parties, and this has to be bigger than the private one. This is 90% of the money that the political parties use in their campaigns. The source is coming from the state, and only 10% can be received only by private sources. So the political parties receive public money for ordinary expenses as well as for the campaign expenditures. And the argument is that we are looking to have more equity in this competition. They receive this amount of money in order to have more equity in the contest and to have a fair play between the political stakeholders. Nevertheless, and although we have been doing an effort, the topic of public money for political parties is still a question. I mean, first of all, is it in excess? If it is used for what it was intended, which is the campaigns, or are the parties using this money for other things? And also within these elections, we continue asking, is there any other kind of money in the campaigns, for example, illicit money, or the money from the governments, municipalities, states, and federal governments? I mean, or other resources that could also be included or received by the political parties in the elections. And finally, with the regulated system, we got to the oversight of 2012, the last presidential election in Mexico, and precisely these topics about the disputes were the cap of the amounts and the non-reported expenditures during the electoral campaign. This, in order to get to a political agreement, which is done in Mexico after every presidential election. In some elections could be more important, in others is less important, but there is always an electoral reform after a presidential election in Mexico. And precisely in 2014, we underwent a very important reform regarding oversight. And so one of the things that Felipe Fuentes was mentioning is that we nationalize the oversight and we apply more control for public money, and we are looking to have an oversight in real time. I mean, as they spend the public money in the campaigns, they have to give a report to the National Institute through a system that we have online to record the operations. They have to inform which are these operations, and after the operation, 37 days after the elections, they have the liability by law to say how much did they spend, how did they spend it, and if they surpass these expenditures. In order to give you an idea of the amount of money, public money, in 2016 and 17, average they receive around $50 million a year, and in 2018, for the next elections, we are considering at the national level, besides what they receive in the states, $60 million for public money that they are going to receive for the campaign expenditures. This, of course, raises again the question because of the topic that we were mentioning about democratic disaffection, because they are questioning if this amount of money is really necessary to continue giving it to the political parties, and if all the citizens are in accordance with these type of expenditures. And of course, we always question the authorities if you are doing if this is a sound oversight, the one that they are carrying out. As I was telling you, we have an online system. The system allows us in real time that the political parties and the candidates to report within the system, and the system could be checked by electoral authorities as well as by judiciary and electoral authorities. The time in which they have to conclude it is 37 days after the campaigns have concluded. And something important about after the reform of 2014 is that there are some consequences about the election in case there are some offenses regarding oversight. One of those are the fines that can be served to the political parties because they surpass the campaign expenditures, or incomes or outcomes that were not reported or that were reported after the time that the deadline. But something that is very important is the annulment of an election because they surpass the cap of the expenditure, or in case they used illicit money in the campaign. This has been a perverse stimulus for the competitors in these elections, in order to seek on an ongoing basis to tell them that every time there is a surpass of the cap of expenditure, so that they are using illicit money, in order, depending on the surveys, to look for a possible annulment. In order to have an idea, the cap for the expenditures for the next presidential election is going to be of 469 million pesos. For the candidate to the presidency, it's $23 million that he will be able to spend during his campaign. But if they surpass 5% of this amount, and if they have a difference of 5% between the first and the second place, could be a cause for the annulment of the election. This is where the participation of the Electoral Tribunal enters, because they only values and checks the test, the evidence that they have. They make the assessment, but it's the judiciary who determines if this election is going to be annulled or not. It seems that this is a hypothesis, but it is not a hypothesis anymore. This is a real topic. This is what we are living it even right now in one of the state elections in 2017, about the validity of the election because of the oversight themes. Besides what we are setting out as campaign expenditures, the parties and the candidates may be able to submit some complaints and file some complaints, and these complaints could be filed from the day the campaign starts until after the campaign finishes, and 15 days after the campaign has finished. And as I was telling you, these complaints, the political candidates are looking forward to accrediting that they use the correct amount of money. So this is a huge challenge to finish on time and to resolve the complaints that were filed at the same time that the reports are delivered. Obviously, every time they file a complaint, this is an accusation that many times in the media they broadcast it as if this were really true, and this creates a problem for the administrative as well as for the judicial authorities. In the last elections in 2017, we received 88 complaints regarding oversight. Many of those didn't have sound foundations, but at the end of the day, we have to check all of them. And some of the risks that we are facing for the 2018 elections is the time in which we have to solve them. The election is going to be on July the 1st. The 37 days that we are mentioning are going to be by the middle of August, and the president of the country has to take office on October 1st. So the dates for the oversight for both authorities are going to be very short. We estimate that because of the amount of complaints we're going to have around 400 complaints in oversight oversight-wise, and this is going to give us a huge challenge. What have we found regarding this oversight? Well, the expenditure in the social media, that sometimes it's not well supported. We have many cases in Facebook and Twitter. Fortunately, when we asked Facebook, was there expenditures in the candidacies of these political candidates, and based on this we can sanction a non-reported expenditure, obviously in Facebook, but we know that there are other social media, and the way to oversee the expenditure is one of the great challenges. I think that the stringent oversight that we have in Mexico has improved the practices, the expenditure practices. The political parties are expending more orderly their expenditures, but of course, this is also the media take advantage of this because they assign that they say that there are additional expenditures, or they say that they are surpassing the cap of the expenditures. And something that where we haven't really made any progress is that the citizens are not using this information. The citizens are very far, not only from politics, but also from public matters. And this information that we have available publicly in web pages that could be checked by the citizens is only for the political stakeholders, because the citizens, they don't use it, or even for the media, only for that. So I think that this is going to pose a huge dilemma, as I was telling you previously, to convince the citizens that these oversight mechanisms are real, they are functioning, and they can bring up several consequences. But at the end of the day, as I was telling you previously, this is something that is used only by the political stakeholders and during the elections. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Andrade. You were mentioning the characteristics that are proper of the political parties, the public and private financing, the ongoing concern on how the resources are being expended. He spoke also about the annulment option when they verify if the cap of the expenditures of the elections were surpassed, as well as all the advertisement times in TV and radio for the campaigns, or if they receive illicit monies. He refers also to the amounts that are expected to be assigned to the political parties for the 2018 election, $60 million, with the huge challenge of the Electoral Institute concerning the time in which they should have to expedite all the controversies that will be filed. So the relevance of the oversight of the social networks or the social media is what is on the table for the discussion. Now we are going to listen to Luz de Los Ángeles Retana Chinchilla. Please, Mrs. Justice. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I hope that you don't fall asleep, because I think after lunch it's the hardest time. But we will try to give you a little bit of an idea of how is the Costa Rican law regarding the financing for elections. The financing model in Costa Rica is a mixed one, because the Constitution of 1949 and the Electoral Code, which is in force right now, which is from the year 2009, include private and state financing. Private financing is regulated by basic rules of transparency, where all the donations should go in the only and sole account of the political party, and they should have to be reported to the Supreme Tribunal of Elections, who publishes in the web page of this body. There is also a prohibition of donations from companies. Only individuals can donate, and there is not a cap for the donation of the individuals. It is also forbidden for foreigners to donate. No foreigners can participate in the campaign. We believe that this is a local matter. That is why the source provision from foreigners is prohibited. Now, regarding the state finances is regulated from the following rules. There is a state reimbursement. The state acknowledges after the elections and according to the results, they consider a reimbursement to the parties. The political constitution determines 0.19% of the GDP of the previous year to the elections. This is due to the fact that the elections in Costa Rica are performed in February, the first week of February. So we could not use the budget of the previous year because there is in the liquidation the period yet still. Now they need to prove their expenditures. They need to evidence how they expend the money according to the technical and accounting mechanisms set by the law and by the rules and regulations set out by the electoral body. There is also an state contribution where the political parties can receive in advance if they grant some liquid guarantees. But this advance payment could not go above 15% of the total amount that can be assigned to each party. The weaknesses that we have found in this law, the one that is current, is that it is not enough. I mean, the advance payment is not enough for the parties. So the parties are looking for money everywhere outside so that they can help them with this financing, because precisely these down payments or advance payments are not enough. Now, these liquid guarantees and the funding, the advance payment, is a mechanism that is not very used because of the difficulty to give these guarantees. The second one, the banking and financial sectors historically have offered some loans based on the surveys, which damages specifically the parties which are in the surveys. And we had the phenomenon 4 years ago that a party that by December used to have 2% in the surveys won the election. So here you can see that this is not a guarantee of the fair participation in the elections. Now, the political debt or the bonds of the political debt could be purchased in the stock market by companies. So here they are breaching what the law is saying. So what are the pending matters? This reform has been proposed to the Congress, and they are expecting there. They are not being paid attention because the political parties are the ones that have to make the amendments in order to regulate themselves. So, some important results have been achieved with the High Tribunal to have transparency in the financial flow of the parties. Nevertheless, they need this amendment to the Constitution, a legal amendment, so that the financing is done in a timely manner and fair. What are the proposals for the corrections? Well, to eliminate those concession certificates to strengthen this down payment, the gratuity of the public transportation of the voters. Costa Rica is a very small country, so people don't think that it's important to vote, but they are used that on the election day the political parties are providing them with the transportation when they want to vote. So that's why they have to manage lots of money for the transportation. And the tribunal has proposed that the companies that have the public transportation concessions allow the individuals to go for free, and to substitute the printed publication of financial reports of the parties and to publish them in the web page. This is because the law demands to publish in the written media the national newspapers, and this is very expensive, and there are parties that cannot afford this. And this is basic because currently the one who has all the responsibility is the treasurer, and we have to make other people accountable for the mismanagement of the monies. So the media has to give 30 minutes on a daily basis for free in order to broadcast the electoral advertisement, and the electoral body is the one who has to distribute in a fair manner these times among all the parties. To regulate and to control the internet and social media advertisement, I think that we have talked a lot about this because in these days, because they are not legalized or legislated, and none of the countries has laws that can regulate all this. So this is what I had as an information for you, and if you have any questions, we are available.
We would like to thank you for the explanation on the legal system in Costa Rica. Of course, you talked about the issues that you have, the kind of financing that is also mixed, that there's no limit for individuals, and but there is one for foreigners. You have to specify and prove how you spent the money. And well, you talked about transparency, and you said that the communication channel is not the most adequate one because it is of a high cost for political parties. Also, you talked about the concern of the need for a better and more stringent regulation on the legislature so that the financing is equitable. So thank you very much for your comments. Now, in order to follow the method set out by the organizers, I will now give the floor to Justice Mwanamwamba. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Zambia is located in Southern
Muchas
Africa,
gracias, señor presidente. Zambia está en el sur de África,
between Congo DR in the north
entre la República Democrática del Congo
and South Africa and Zimbabwe in the south. It has an area of about 752,618 square kilometers, with a population of about 16.6 million. As of now, Zambia has a total of 63 registered political parties.
Tenemos un total de 63 partidos políticos.
In my view, that number is
En mi opinión, ese número
ridiculously too big for such a small population.
es realmente alto comparado con nuestra población.
Elections are held every 5
Las
years.
elecciones se llevan a cabo cada 5 años.
They include presidential and legislative elections.
Incluyen las elecciones presidenciales y el poder legislativo.
Electoral Commission of Zambia, which is the statutory body,
Electoral de Zambia,
conducts elections.
lleva a cabo o está encargado de la organización de las
It's funded by the National Treasury,
la Tesorería Nacional es la que proporciona los fondos.
Zambia got independence from UK in 1964.
Zambia en 1964,
That's about 53 years ago.
más o menos hace 53 años,
Over the period,
empezó con sus elecciones.
we have had two changes of
En
government,
este periodo hemos tenido 2 cambios de gobierno.
democratically and peacefully.
Ambos fueron de manera democrática y pacífica.
In Zambia, political parties are financed privately.
En Zambia los partidos políticos se financian de manera privada.
Their finances are generated internally and externally.
Y sus finanzas se generan tanto de manera interna como de manera externa.
Internally through members' contributions and levies on members of parliament.
Internas son por las cuotas que pagan los miembros y las cuotas del Parlamento.
Externally through external donors and well-wishers.
De la manera externa reciben dinero a través de donadores.
These finances are not enough to meet the demands that comes with electoral campaigns.
Para satisfacer las demandas que vienen con las campañas electorales.
In my view, this undermines the democratic functions of a political party.
Esto menoscaba la independencia del partido político.
It leads to a one-sided control by a few wealthy individuals
Lleva a un control unilateral de unos pocos
on
individuos.
decision-making and selection of party leaders.
Y la toma de decisiones solamente es por parte de unos pocos líderes del partido político.
At this stage, I wish to address you on the legal framework for public funding of political parties.
Ahora quisiera hablarles un poco del marco normativo, el marco legal para el financiamiento de los partidos políticos.
Political parties in Zambia are registered under the Societies Act,
En Zambia están registrados bajo la ley de partidos políticos,
which is Chapter 119 of the Laws of Zambia.
que está incluida en, obviamente, entre las leyes de Zambia.
This act provides for the control of societies by registration
Un control de las sociedades por medio de un registro
and supervision.
y de la supervisión.
It was enacted as far back as 1958.
Entró en vigor en 1958
The act does require disclosure of financial records to the Register of
y
Societies,
requiere que se divulguen los registros financieros de estas corporaciones, de estas sociedades,
but creates no restrictions on how parties raise or spend their money.
no crea ninguna restricción sobre cómo los partidos se gastan el dinero.
It does not make provisions for the funding of political parties by the
Y
state.
la financiación de los partidos políticos por parte del Estado
In 2003,
se dio de esa manera. En el
The
año
f-
2003
the first attempt was made
se hizo el primer intento
to fund political parties from government coffers.
de financiar los partidos políticos desde el gobierno.
In that year, a political parties fund bill was introduced into the National Assembly or legislature.
Se introdujo la ley de los partidos políticos en la Cámara de Diputados.
It was intended to provide for, among other things, funding of political parties,
Debería de incluir, entre algunas otras cosas, el financiamiento para los partidos políticos,
when it was still in draft form.
la manera en la que se iba a hacer este financiamiento.
The then president, called Levi Mwanawasa, rejected the
El
measure.
presidente Manabuasa en ese momento la rechazó de inmediato.
He was of the view that Zambia did not have enough money to
Porque él
fund political
pensaba que
parties.
Zambia no tenía suficientes recursos, suficiente dinero para financiar los partidos
So
políticos.
the move was abandoned.
Entonces se abandonó ese movimiento.
In 2016, which is last year,
En 2016, o sea, el año pasado,
Zambia passed a new constitution.
Zambia aprobó una nueva constitución.
Under the new constitution,
Otra situación,
Article 64
el artículo 64
provides for the establishment and management of a political parties fund.
establece el manejo de los fondos de los partidos políticos
It's meant to fund political parties,
y menciona que está destinado, obviamente, para financiar.
but such funding is only limited to those who have
Los fondos son limitados
members in the legislature or the National Assembly.
para aquellos que tienen miembros en alguna de las cámaras, la Asamblea Nacional o la Legislativa.
Article 4 B
El artículo 4b
states as follows: the accounts of political parties which are funded under the
los
Political
partidos
Parties
políticos
Fund
están financiados bajo este financiamiento de
and
partidos
the submissions of audited accounts by the political parties.
tienen que entregar los reportes de cómo han gastado sus fondos.
C talks of the sources of funds for the political parties.
El C habla de los fondos específicos para partidos políticos.
D provides for the maximum amount of money to be used for
El D
political
establece
campaigns
la cantidad máxima de dinero
during
que se puede
elections.
utilizar para las campañas políticas durante las elecciones.
And the E provides for matters incidental
Y el E,
to matters specified
gastos
in this clause, end of quote.
que se especifiquen en las cortes.
Now, on the basis of the foregoing constitutional provisions,
Ahora, con base en estas disposiciones,
Zambia is in the process of enacting a political parties bill.
Zambia está en el proceso de promulgar una ley en la materia.
This act is still in draft form.
Esta sigue sin promulgarse, se está redactando.
And the objectives of the draft legislation read as follows.
Y los objetivos de este proyecto de ley,
Quote, to provide for the registration and regulation of political parties,
proporcionar un registro para los partidos políticos,
the establishment of political parties board,
establecer un consejo para los partidos políticos,
the establishment and management of political parties fund,
establecer un fondo para el manejo de los partidos políticos,
the sources of funds for the political parties,
establecer también fondos específicos para los partidos políticos
and the matters connected with or incidental to the foregoing, end of quote.
y temas conectados con los gastos incidentales.
But for the bill establishes the fund,
Pero la ley que establece los fondos,
under clause 7,
en su cláusula número 7,
the distribution of the fund is stated as follows.
menciona que la distribución del fondo va a ser de la manera
Quote,
siguiente.
quote, 1, the fund shall be distributed as follows.
Número 1, los fondos se deben de distribuir de la siguiente manera.
A, 95% of the fund
95% de los fondos
proportionately by reference to the total number of votes
se
secured by
reparten de
such
manera
political
proporcional
party
dependiendo de los votos que recibió cada partido político,
with seats in the National Assembly
con escaños en la Asamblea Nacional,
in the preceding general election,
en la elección general inmediata anterior.
and B,
Y B,
5% for the administration expenses of the fund,
5% para la administración de los gastos del fondo.
2, despite paragraph I, A of the subsection 1,
2, en su párrafo A, subsección 1,
an independent candidate is not entitled to receive funding
independiente
under the provisions of this
puede
act.
recibir fondos
End of quote.
bajo las disposiciones o de conformidad con las disposiciones de esta ley.
Let me elaborate the last
Quisiera
clause.
hablar un poquito más acerca de esta última cláusula que mencioné.
Ordinarily, most of members of the legislature are sponsored by the party,
La mayoría de los miembros de la legislatura le piden
but in certain cases, the individual will stand as
un
independent
partido político, pero en muchos de los casos
And
el
win.
individuo va a ser independiente y va a poder ganar.
According to this clause,
De
Su-
conformidad con esta
such
cláusula,
independent members
estos miembros independientes
are not entitled to funding under
no tienen derecho a recibir los fondos
this draft bill.
de conformidad con este proyecto de ley.
Just been given a yellow card, so I'll summarize.
Me acaban de dar una tarjeta amarilla, entonces simplemente voy a resumir lo que me queda por decir.
Subclause 2 goes further to provide that what money allocated to political party cannot be used for
Menciona las restricciones para lo cual no se pueden utilizar los fondos de los partidos políticos.
the proposed legislation establishes a political parties fund board
La legislación relevante es
whose core function include administration of the fund.
las funciones incluyen la administración del fondo.
The bill also provides for a payment of members of the board by the president,
El numeral B también incluye al presidente,
but they are subject to ratification by the National Assembly, which is the legislature.
sujeto a aclaración por parte de la Asamblea Nacional.
It is hoped that when passed,
Esto, cuando se apruebe,
this
se
act
promulgue
will help
esta
address
ley,
the undesirable state of affairs,
resolver el estado negativo actual
and hopefully deepen democracy in Zambia.
y esperemos que mejore la calidad de la democracia en Zambia.
I thank you for your attention.
Les agradezco mucho su atención.
Bien, agradecemos la participación del Justice Muanan Wambua y a continuación, siguiendo el método ya implementado, vendrán una serie de preguntas.
We will have some questions. You will have up to 3 minutes to ask your question, and then the answer should be no longer than 1 minute. João Pedro Barrosa Caupers from the Constitutional Tribunal of Portugal has the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My intervention focuses on the morning session, not this one, because in the morning I wasn't able to speak because of time constraints. I would like to thank the Electoral Tribunal of the Federal Judiciary of the United Mexican States for the opportunity of coming back to San Miguel de Allende 3 years after my last visit, which was my first visit as a tourist back then. And this is why I am happy to be here close to the 100th anniversary of the Mexican Constitution, which helps to guarantee the rights of all human beings and especially Mexican people. In order to use an English or French that are acceptable, and upon the risk of I don't speak French or English very well, so I will speak Spanish, which I don't speak it very well, so I apologize. I'm not going to ask any questions, but I'm just going to tell you about what happens in my country. The most visible expression of a problem of lack of satisfaction when it comes to the performance of democratic institutions is just the same as in other European democracies. The turnout in elections, the vote in my country is not mandatory as per the law. Just 45% in the last local elections, which took place this year. The electoral system, per se, is trusted by the citizens, even though sometimes they might discuss the possible benefits of introducing uninominal electoral circles that some think will increase the electoral participation. In the last 2 local elections, 2013 and 2017, the law allowed for candidates which were citizens without any party, which were independent, in order to increase the levels of public participation and turnout. And that was achieved. That was what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I have Jean-Philippe Desrosiers would like to make a comment. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Gracias. Merci beaucoup. Il s'agit plus d'une réaction.
Thank you very much. Well, this is more of a reaction to prompt other reactions regarding what was said with other political parties. Like I already said this morning, the French law that frames the activities of political parties,
Les règles de financement des partis politiques français, ce serait trop compliqué.
well, I will not explain the way they work, the political parties in France work. It would be very complicated, but I would like to say that they have both public and private financing. The public represents 63 million euros every year, which is the highest amount, and it's even higher than the figures that were mentioned this morning. This represents at least 2/3 of the global financing of political parties. So they are pretty much under the power of the state, and even though they don't control it directly, it provides most of its financing, and this is included in the results of their elections and national representation. However, in France, and I would like to know what the situation is in other countries, for instance, in Mexico, in Zambia, or in Costa Rica, is there financing for electoral campaigns? Is there a public financing for electoral campaigns that is added to the financing of political parties? So this will allow the state to limit electoral campaigns, vis-a-vis what happens in the U.S., for instance, is there a limit for electoral campaigns? So the candidates are not allowed to go above certain cap. It's 16.5 million euros for the presidential elections for the first run, and for the second one it can go to 23 million euros. If they go above this cap, the sanction and penalty is quite high, and the candidate would have to cover all the expenses when they usually would have had to pay only half. There is an institution that can conduct an appeal before electoral justice. For instance, in 2012 we had a historic case because Nicolas Sarkozy, who was candidate for his second term, had gone above the cap by more than 300,000 euros. So he was condemned by the Constitutional Board, and he was ruled to pay, his political party, he had to pay the entire amount of the campaign. So that effectively ruined that political party. And they received donations, and that's how they solved the problem, and it kind of worked. So this is how campaign financing works in France, and I think that's essential in order to respect equality between candidates and to respect democracy.
Muchas gracias, profesor.
Thank you very much, Professor. Mr. Counselor, please, the floor is yours. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's very interesting, the comments from Brazil and also from the representative of France. And it catches my eye really because we have very similar rules in Mexico and in France. Public financing is way above private financing. The amounts, I think they're also similar, even though Mexico is a country that is not as developed as France, and that is what people say. Why so much money to finance political parties? And I think that this solution that was found in France, honestly, I think is a more democratic solution. If the cap is surpassed, the political parties should pay for all the expenditures of the campaign, and that public money should be returned. But here in Mexico, the solution that was found is that the election is annulled because the cap is surpassed. So here, it is questionable whether if it is against that candidate, or if it's done for the benefit or for not of another candidate. There's another restriction. If you surpass the cap, if the winner surpasses the cap, they cannot participate again in any. The election is annulled, and they can never participate in. They cannot participate in a second election. This was found. This election was. This option was found in 2014, and we will see how it works in 2018. Well, in Costa Rica, the total cap is 0.19% of the GDP of the total budget, public budget of the year before the election was held. That number is divided by the total number of votes that were cast, and based on that, each vote will have a cost. and the amount of votes that were cast for each political party, that's what they will receive. So each political party will report all their financial statements, including, of course, what they spent, and they include up until what can be covered. The rest has to be covered by the political party. It's supposed that it has to come from donations of individuals. If the political party cannot prove or provide evidence who provided that money, then that will go to the justice courts due to racketeering, tax evasion, or whatever cause that is found by the DA's office. And like I was saying yesterday, we have had treasurers of political parties that have had to go to jail because of that mismanagement of funds. But there is no limit, no cap to spend in the campaign. But what has happened, that's very interesting, is that political parties try to prove that they abide by austerity and that they don't spend a lot of money, or that they receive donations from the people, of that, or that the t-shirts that they use in the campaign, or the hats, or all these things are used to finance or to help the political party with the help, of course, of the citizen. And they feel proud because they try to prove that they spent less money in a campaign, and they want to reduce. Actually, there's candidates that are now saying, oh no, we're gonna spend 25% less. So this is part of the electoral offer, the electoral promise to attract voters. That has been one of the social pressure mechanisms that has been established to avoid excess expenditure in campaigns, because definitely there's no democracy without money. But logically and obviously, this they are overspending, wasting money, and I would even dare to say they are stealing money. So there has been social pressure to demand political austerity from political parties when it comes to elections. Thank you very much. Justice, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, in Zambia, the law stands now.
Muchas gracias. En Zambia, en este momento, no hay ningún financiamiento de gobierno o público para las campañas políticas. Un partido tiene que obtener sus propios fondos para la campaña de sus propios miembros.
Or from foreign donors.
O de personas externas que quieran donar.
And there's no limit on the amount of money you can spend on campaigning. I talked to foreign donors. In 2001, we had the presidential and parliamentary elections. As of then, the ruling party was MMD, which means Movement for Multi-Party Democracy. The largest opposition political party was UPND, which means United Party for National Development. UPND was supported by a company called Anglo-American. That's a large international mining company. It had invested heavily in Zambia's copper mines. Their preferred candidate was the president of the opposition party. Strongly believed that they massively funded the opposition party. The presidential candidate of the opposition party was a former mining engineer. He knew a lot about mining in Zambia. So it's strongly believed that had he won with their support, he was going to give them preference or preferential treatment in mining, copper mining.
estas minas de cobre.
So when he lost,
Entonces, cuando perdió,
Anglo-American were disappointed,
Anglo American, la compañía, estaba muy decepcionada
and they abruptly pulled out their investment in Zambia.
y retiraron todas sus inversiones en Zambia.
That sudden pullout out of mining caused a lot of financial problems for the economy.
Y este hecho causó muchos problemas económicos.
It adversely affected the Zambian economy.
Esto afectó de manera muy grave a la economía.
Eventually, other companies from China, India came in, filled the vacuum.
De China y de la India llegaron y llenaron ese vacío que había dejado esta otra compañía.
You can see how dangerous financial political support from outside
Con esto pueden ver lo peligroso que es el apoyo político y financiero
can be.
de actores externos.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Justice.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Justice.
Me indican los organizadores que vamos un poco atrasados en el desahogo de la sesión. Voy a pedir la autorización de la Asamblea, si me permiten concentrar las intervenciones para darle una intervención conjunta al Pleno una vez finalizadas los cuestionamientos o las interrogantes que formulen. Me han pedido intervenir Chad Vickery, de la Fundación Internacional para los Sistemas Electorales. Después daré uso de la palabra al
Will
magistrado
begin, and then I will give the floor to Justice José Luis Vargas Valdez from the High Chamber of the Electoral Tribunal of Mexico. Then, if you will allow me, Daniel Sobato from International IDEA will follow, then Mijael Mujalem from the Getulio Vargas Foundation, and finally Martín Okumo Masira from the African Jurists. And we would close with that, and then we will just answer all the questions together in one go. So in that order, please go ahead, Jack Vickery.
Thank you very much. From IFES's perspective,
Muchas gracias. Desde la perspectiva del IFES, trabajando en las finanzas electorales a nivel global, creo que
in the extensive legal frameworks that you have and the resources that you have to both implement those frameworks and also to prosecute those that might break the law. Whereas many places in which we work, they really don't have the resources to be able to implement a really complicated electoral process, campaign finance monitoring process, and investigate the abuses of campaign finance violation. It'd be interesting to hear from you your thoughts in regards to how you can do that in a developing country in a slower pace with fewer resources first. The second thing that I'd like to raise, and something that we do not discuss a great deal, but we're researching extensively at IFES, is the abuse of state resources. How are governments and parties in power using the instruments of the state to benefit themselves to get around campaign finance laws? We're talking people, transportation, buildings, the media. We find this to be a huge problem internationally, and when these issues come up, they're usually not prosecuted in the countries in which we are working anyway. And I'm wondering how, in your systems, you work and monitor the use of state resources in the campaign process. Thank you.
Del Estado en las campañas electorales.
Magistrado José Luis Vargas Valdez, por favor.
Muchas gracias, magistrado Felipe Fuentes Barrera. Quisiera simplemente señalar que uno de los temas fundamentales que me parece que hoy adolece todas las
according to my experience, is in all the democracies is the financing of a party's campaigns, since it also influences in this area the democracy disaffection. In the Mexican case, it seems to me that after 3 decades of public financing that was huge for the political parties, this starts creating a concrete question and founded, of course, for the citizens, and this is the challenge that the political parties are facing in this very moment. So I think that one of the things that we should have to stress out in this agenda, because of this precisely global network, because it matches with the matters that we have been working in the last 2 days regarding electoral justice, has to do with the public funding or financing. The studies around all the positive and negative aspects that the private funding has, and of course the accountability and best practices tools for the parties as well as from the states in order to prevent political corruption, which is linked to campaigns and political parties. So this is one of the proposals that I would like to emphasize, to state as one of the key points for the information that we are going to enter in the global network. And I would like to acknowledge the National Electoral Institute for the huge job that they have to do in our country. The law that they have passed for these aspects regarding the regulations as well as the legislative, and of course in the Mexican case, their contributions to the financing of campaigns and parties, and we have to count on to have the support that the institute, the National Institute, has for us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Justice. Now, Mr. Daniel Sobato, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. There are 3 brief items, but I think that they are very important to mention. One, to make this political financing and to link it with the corruption, influence traffic, and interest conflicts. From the standpoint of international IDEA and the OCDE, we have been driving the need of having a more holistic and general focus, not only to analyze the impact that the money has in order to guarantee the integrity of the elections, but also in order to know how can we regulate and oversee, monitor the integrity of the political system. The experience, not only in Latin America, but almost in all the regions of the world, is that in very many cases, not all, but many cases, political financing is the door of entrance for many corruption scandals. Hence, this is a core topic which drives me to my second point. I would like to suggest in a respectful manner that when we give our speeches, we will try to make some conclusions in order to see how is that these phenomena are impacting the electoral justice, which are the challenges that they are facing, and which are the responses that they will have to give. There are lots of spheres where the electoral justice has no competence in, but there are many other aspects where electoral justice plays a very important role. And the design of this new electoral justice is not the same. I mean, it's not the same in a system with 2 electoral bodies, like, for example, in Mexico, as Mr. Andrade was mentioning, that the INE investigates, but is the tribunal the one that gives the last word. And there are other justices in Latin America where they only have one body, where they have the administration, the investigation, and the sanction areas. The second item, which is important as a challenge for the electoral justice, is that many of these regulations regarding political financing of the electoral campaigns are creating the impossible missions for the electoral justice. Mission impossible to comply because on the one side, the policymaker is not providing with the financial and economic or resources or whatever, and the policymaker is not allowing the electoral justice to articulate their their work with other instances. And I'm, for example, referring to the banking area. I'm referring to the fiscal departments. I am referring also to the research, like the investigation bureaus of each one of the countries. But overall, in many cases, electoral justice has an impossible mission because when applying sanctions that are effective and that these constitute incentives in order to prevent to have this illicit or illegal financing or to surpass the caps, at the end of the day, there are only fines, economic fines, and instead of being disincentivizing people, they are incentivizing them. For example, the formula that was mentioned by our peer from France, if by surpassing the caps I maximize the possibilities of winning an election, then I am going to breach the law, then I take office, and afterwards I give back the money that I have to give back. So we have to make all these candidates to become liable also because they should lose office. I think this is a very complex situation, but I think that this is necessary in order to make the electoral justice work. Thank you very much, Dr. Sobato. Now I am going to give the floor to Mijael Mojalen, please. Muchas gracias. Rápidamente, el tema del financiamiento político pareciera ser uno de muy poca creatividad entre los países, no solamente los que están representados aquí, sino la mayor parte de los países.
And I wonder if there is experiences or at least debates among your countries on your parliaments, on your local political realities of systems which could perhaps by using the financing, the public funding, not only look to the past, to the previous election, and distribute the funds according to the proportion obtained in the last election, and perhaps create a system which would allow a distribution corresponding to the will of the people closer to the election. Take for instance the example of Brazil. Between the elections, the 2014 and the coming election 2018, country uncovered big corruption scandal, which involves the previous government, the current government, and many other parties. But those parties are the one with the larger number of votes on the previous election. They will receive the larger amount of public funding, which will significantly increase their chances of getting a larger share of the parliament in the coming election. And despite the fact that probably that wouldn't be the distribution if people would have the choice of how to distribute. So I wonder if there is debates or experiences in democracy voucher types of distributing public funds. And in the case of Brazil, what makes it such a dramatic case is that Parliament increased the public funds, created an extra fund, which will probably reach the equivalent to $1 billion just for the year of 2018, which will make completely artificial and the will of the people in terms of topping or making some sort of resistance to that figure of the past in the coming election. So I wonder if not on your countries, perhaps the other colleagues around this table have. And just one last point. This could be one of the main one of the highlights of this network, which would be perhaps highlight and study deeply those experiences that could, perhaps they are very rare, I assume, but they could be used for other attempts in different jurisdictions. Thank you.
Gracias a usted.
Thank you very much.
Tiene el uso de la voz Martín Okumo Masiga.
Mr. Martín Okumo Masiga.
Yeah. My question goes to the Deputy Chief Justice of Zambia. I'm wondering what accountability mechanisms the bill is proposing and what you think of their effectiveness. Because I know Uganda is one of the countries which have had some issues with accountability for party funding. There's not much of it, but for even the little that there is, sometimes you have difficulties. Oh, I'm asking, what accountability mechanisms is the bill proposing for those that use public funding for their parties, and what you think of the effectiveness of those mechanisms?
A bit faint. Accountability mechanism?
Yes, for
The proposed legislation?
yes. What accountability mechanisms is the bill proposing for the parties that take the funding from state coffers, and what you think of the effectiveness of those mechanisms?
Bien, muchas gracias. Agotadas las participaciones.
Thank you very much.
Voy a darle el uso de la palabra.
Now I am
al señor
going to give the
consejero
floor
Andrade para que
to
también
Justice
responda
Andrade
a
so that he could answer to these interventions also. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to tell you how are we overseeing the expenditures in the campaigns. In the oversight unit that we have in the Electoral Institute, we are monitoring the advertisement in the streets, the printed advertisements and internet advertisements that could be benefiting a candidate, to see if it was reported in our online system that we have, and in case the report does not correspond to the expenditure that was detected, we made an estimate of the costs, and this is determined as a non-reported expenditure of the candidate. This is what we do. Likewise, we visit the events of the candidates. They have to report, they have to give us the agenda of their events, and an auditor, a monitor goes there, and they set out which is the cost of the event. If the report matches the cost that was set out by the auditor, it is given as a reported expenditure. Otherwise, we state out the difference. And the question about the expenditure of the monies of the government in the campaign. In Mexico, we have a problem because there are some social programs, and these social programs are programs that help the low-end classes, and these programs are not suspended during the campaign. So we are speaking about giving them milk, food. So we do not suspend these programs, and there is where we receive public money in the campaign. So this is a debate that we are having, but on the one side, it is allowed by the law, and on the other hand, is questioned by the candidate. Of course, thank you very much for your comment. The INE is willing to collaborate, and it's available for everything you need. And I would like to tell Daniel Sobato that many countries of Latin America, specifically Mexico, we are involved in possible corruption scandals during the campaigns, and this is something that legal-wise, we cannot set it out. We have investigation powers that end at 5 years. So the scandals for the election of 2012, the 5 years have elapsed. So we have an issue here, even a legal issue, because we are not going to be able to set out this thing. And of course, this is a topic for the media, and it's being used as a political weapon. So I think, and I agree, that many times the law sets out impossible missions for the electoral authorities. So this is something quite complicated. In the National Institute, we may cross out all this information with the finance department, with the area or the Bureau of Financial Intelligence. Nevertheless, because of the time constraint, we have a huge issue, because when we ask for this information, the authorities are compelled to provide us with that information, but they don't provide it in a timely manner. So I insist, this is a mission impossible in order to detect the source of the illicit monies. And regarding the question from Brazil, yes, there is a debate in Mexico. It's called "If there are no votes, if people don't vote, there is no money," and this is a proposal made by an independent legislator from Jalisco, which sets out that they are going to give money to the parties according to the votes that they obtain. This is not by law, but this is circulating in the media. And something that is very important after every earthquake is that in the internet page in change.org, they were asking not to give money to the political parties, but to provide it to the people who lost their houses, etc., during the earthquake, and it was approved by all the citizenship. So this is a very sensitive topic, this of the political parties and the public financing. And we are just about to have a reform in Mexico, probably in the year 2019. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You have the floor. Well, how do we monitor the use of resources? Well, this is a very hard job and very detailed, which is under the obligation of the Registry of Political Parties, which is guarded by the High Superior Tribunal. There has to be a registration or a registry of public accountants which are capable, previously approved and certified to do the accounting for the political parties. They have to report all the expenditures that the party has made, and there is a cross-control of those expenditures. Of course, that we are completely in agreement as an electoral body with the opinion of Dr. Sobato that there should be, or that there is a need of having a holistic scope on how to regulate the integrity of the political process, because honestly, this is the vulnerable point. It's the door for corruption, mainly in the geographical area where we are located. To transfer drug to North America, of course. So we are a very vulnerable country. We are very small. Costa Rica is very small, and we are in the center of the Americas. And they can traffic lots of illegal money that could go to the political campaigns, and that is why our constant concern for legislating and better articulating the monitoring of the financing for the campaigns. It is obvious, as Dr. Sobato was also mentioning, that the Legislative Assembly and the And the policymakers don't want to regulate their own political parties because any legislation that they propose in the next campaign, their parties would have to comply with it or to abide by it. We, of course, are in favor of having more people accountable for this financing in the campaign, not only to pay the fines and not only to hold responsible to the accountant. We believe that the people in charge, the candidate has to be the one who is responsible because they have to realize how they are working with the funds. It's not only the treasurer. And one of the ideas when we have had a brainstorm is to openly commit, mainly nowadays that we have more and more transparency in communication because of the social media, to commit these candidates or the main candidates of the departments or provinces that we have to sign an agreement. This is a matter of ethics, so that they are compromised if they get to office to rule in order or to legislate in order to decrease the public expenditure or to impose more controls than the ones that we have proposed. But it has been quite difficult to do this because in the electoral campaigns they propose lots of things that are not accomplished. But we have looked for several mechanisms to continue working in better monitoring and transparency to manage resources, because as my Mexican colleague was mentioning, in Costa Rica we had just have a tropical storm which affected lots of vulnerable sectors, and the proposal was the same from the citizens to avoid giving money for the political campaigns, but that it was given to rebuild the areas that were affected. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Madam Justice. Now I am going to give the floor to Justice Muanan Mwambwa. Muchas gracias, señor presidente. La pregunta que provino de este lado de la mesa
safeguarding public use or abuse of government funds by a party in power. I have to give you some background. For the first 27 years of Zambia's independence, Zambia was ruled by one party called UNIP, which means United National Independence Party. Between 1964 and 1968, there was multi-party politics. Political parties were allowed to contest against UNIP. In 1972, the ruling party imposed one-party rule in Zambia. Because it had a majority in parliament or the legislature, it amended the constitution to introduce one-party rule. Opposition political parties were abolished and banned. So thereafter, public abuse of public funds was rife. The president then, called Kaunda, had a cabinet of about 24%, those ministers running ministries. And in addition to that, and above that, he established what is known as the Central Committee. That was a purely party structure, consisting of 24 members. They were not government officials, but just pure pure party members. That structure was copied from the communist world, such as the Soviet Union then and China. The Central Committee was earning salary from the government. They were driving government vehicles. They were funded by the government all around. The ruling party used to say the party and this government. So there was no line between the party and the government. That was open public use or abuse of public funds. During the period, the ruling party built a huge office block using public funds, specifically for its own party headquarters. In 1991, a number of private citizens formed up an organization called the MMD. They called for the introduction of multi-party politics. One party rule had become very, very unpopular. The economy was going down. So the party in power listened and decided to amend the constitution to revert to multi-party politics. Then this MMD movement, which means Movement of Multi-Party Democracy, was created into a party. And when there was the first general election under multipartyism, in Zambia in 1991, UNIP was massively voted out of power. They lost power. MMD took power. And what it did was now to target that huge party structure. It was compulsory acquired without compensation and made a government property. The new ruling party used an act called Land Acquisition Act, which empowered the head of state to compulsory acquire property in the national interest. Now, MMD ruled for 20 years. Up to November 2011, even when it was in power as well. Like UNIP, it similarly used government funds for its own operations. At one stage, they were alleged to have bought 37 motor vehicles out of government funds for their party operations. It became a court case. So to answer the question in summary, it was a challenge in Zambia to safeguard against abuse of government or public funds by the party in power. During campaigning, the party in power would order a parastatal owned by the government to contribute money towards its funding. A company that was used for that purpose is called ZESCO, which means Zambia Electric Supply. That's the company that generates and distributes power. It was also always ordered to contribute towards funding of the party in power. Thank you. Now, coming to the question, there was another question again from here on accountability of party funding under the proposed legislation. Because I received a yellow card during my presentation, I skipped a provision which answered your question. I'm going to read it out now to answer your question. Clause 38 of the proposed legislation on part funding research follows. Quote, 1, money is allocated to a registered political party from the fund shall be used for the purposes compatible with democracy, including A, promoting the representation in parliament of women and youth, B, promoting active participation by individual citizens in political life, C, covering the election expenses of the political party and the broadcasting of the policies of the political party, now I have a red card. D, the organization by the political party of civic education in democracy and other electoral process. In short, money received for funding of political party from the government is confined on the expenditure over these objectives. There's a percentage. You cannot spend more than what the Act provides. Within the limited period, that's how far I can go to answer your question. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Damos por concluidos los trabajos de esta mesa sobre financiamiento político en las elecciones.
Political financing of elections. Thank you very much. We have concluded this session. And now we invite you for the next session, which is number 3 of this plenary assembly of the Global Network on Electoral Justice, called Equal Political Participation. And we are going to start these new works immediately. Thank you very much.